Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to the first show for Ramadan of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Well, this afternoon, in our new time slot, we have great pleasure in welcoming Qayyum Ahmad, who is the CEO of the Human Rights Commission of South Africa. Qayyum Ahmad holds a BA Honours in LLB and an LLB from the UCT University, a PDM from Stellenbosch, a Master's from the University of Western Cape, an LLM from Leiden University, and a PDM at UCT. His educational background is that he's currently with the University of Oxford, United Kingdom, where he's pursuing a Master of Laws in International Human Rights. In May 2010, he graduated from the School of Business, University of Cape Town, South Africa, and he holds a postgraduate diploma in trade law and policy with distinctions. In June 2009, he was with the American University College of Law, United States of America, where he carried out independent research on congressional foreign policy development. In November 2006, he was with the Graduate School of Business, University of Cape Town, South Africa, where he pursued a program for management development. In September 2004, he was with the Leiden University in the Netherlands, where he pursued a Master's of Law in International Law. In December 2003, he was with the University of Western Cape, where he did a Master of Arts, MA in Anthropology, which he graduated with distinctions or cum laude. In December 2002, he was with the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, where he pursued a postgraduate diploma in management of HIV and AIDS. In 2001, he was with the University of Cape Town, where he obtained and read for his Bachelor of Laws or LLB. In December 1999, still with the University of Cape Town, he obtained a Bachelor of Arts Honours First Class with awards and distinctions. In September 2013, he represented the Commonwealth Chevening Scholarship, which he obtained a full scholarship awarded to complete his master's degree in International Human Rights Law at Oxford. In 2011, he was awarded the top 200 South African awards by the Mail and Guardian newspaper, which recognizes 200 people annually aged between 35 and under for their impact, creativity, and resonance of their value in building a young South African democracy. In June 2009, he received the Herbert H. Humphrey Fellowship. The fellowship is a non-degree program run by the United States government, bringing together mid-career professionals with remarkable leadership skills. In September 2003, he obtained the Nelson Mandela Scholarship. This is a prestigious scholarship which is offered by the Leiden University in Netherlands to South Africans who demonstrate their ability to contribute to the development of South Africa and the African continent. In February 2002, during the South African Netherlands Research Program on Alternative Development Scholarships, this scholarship was awarded through the University of the Western Cape for him to complete his master's degree in anthropology, focusing on gender and HIV and AIDS. His professional experience includes, from 2010 up to the present, being with the South African Human Rights Commission in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and he provides strategic leadership and overall management of the Human Rights Commission Secretariat, and is responsible for 178 staff members across 10 offices nationally with a budget of just over 120 million. Then the Commission represents the Commission at all levels, including at Parliament and in the media. During the period 2004 to 2010, during the Parliament for the Parliament of which is situated in Cape Town, he was the team leader, multilateral international Relations section. And that was to manage Parliament's relationship with international multilateral united institutions, including the United Nations. He also provided for international policy advice and analysis to senior politicians, including the Speaker, on strategic relations with multilateral institutions. During January to June 2009, he was at the United States Congress in Washington, D.C., where he obtained a congressional fellow, and Congressman Jim McDermott's office, where he conducted research to develop and position papers on various topics. He attended congressional and constitutional meetings with the congressman. During June to October 2004, he was with the University of Cape Town as a lecturer in anthropology, and where he had to prepare and present lectures to first and third year students on various topics. He had to develop tutorials, set and mark exams, and provide general academic assistance to students. As part of his organizational membership, he belongs to the network of African human rights institutions, which is an accredited human rights expert, which makes him an accredited human rights expert. He is a member of the Millennium Development National Coordinating Committee for South Africa. He is with the Aspen Institute for Africa Leadership Initiative Fellow, ALI. His volunteer activities include being a member of the advisory board for the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics. He's a board member of the Community Development Resource Agency. He's a member of the selection committee for Rhodes Scholarships. His publications have been vast and wide, which include Rethinking Human Rights Education in the Mail and Guardian in March 2014. He's part of the expert panelists on constitutional literacy and human rights education, which is section 27. And he's been invited as an expert by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, to train human rights defenders in Iraq. That was at September 2013. His social media experience, which he wrote about and which was published in the Thinkers magazine, under the brackets "On Social Media, a Human Rights Perspective," the Thinkers magazine, which will form the basis of our discussion this afternoon. His other publications include Human Rights, Law and Advocacy, a 2-week summer school lecture series presented at Duke University during June 2013, and he provides human rights training to high-level diplomats from Somalia during the diplomatic training program hosted by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation during March 2013. He's also wrote Plato, The Ring of Gaius is on Your Finger, which appeared in the City Press during March 2013, as well as The Right to Dignity is Pointless Without Water, which appeared in the Mail and Guardian during March 2013. His article, The Progressive Realization of the Right to Access Healthcare, lecture delivered at the Ethics Alive Symposium, University of Witwatersrand during March 2013. It's now time for me to take a break, and we'll be back with you just after this break. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the next portion, our next segment. Now it gives me great pleasure tonight to welcome my very special guest, whom you had the pleasure of listening to his very, very wide qualifications, Qayyum Ahmed, CEO of the Human Rights Commission. Assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
Absolute pleasure. Now, this afternoon we'll be talking very, very interestingly about an article that Qayyum had written, the background of which is quite amazing. If you recall that during, I think, 2003, there was a tragedy at the West Dean Dam where a bus full of students plunged into the dam, resulting in many, many deaths. Now, last year, a gentleman, a particular gentleman, decided to hold a braai at the dam, celebrating the deaths of these white students. And Qayyum had written an article about that, and I found that fascinating article that he had written. So, Qayyum, tell us about this article, the background, and as I've just sketched, it was about this tragedy that occurred, but really the tragedy was being celebrated by a particular gentleman.
Sure. At the South African Human Rights Commission, we often have to deal with cases of racism and more increasingly the use of social media in perpetuating those racist examples. And one of the cases we dealt with fairly recently involved a young man, 24 years old, born in the early 90s, called Zama Khumalo. And Zama is a young person who is unemployed, found himself at the Westdene Dam, having read an interesting account of South African history in which it was indicated that white South Africans had marched to the Pretoria to celebrate their dominance over black South Africans. And this angered Zama very much as a young black South African. He went to the Westdene Dam, came across a memorial, and on the memorial it simply read in memoriam and listed the names of 42 white-sounding South African names. Zama hadn't realized that these were children who had died in a bus accident, but assumed automatically, having read this book, based on his own experiences as a young black South African, that these names had something to do with the apartheid regime. Went home, opened his laptop and went onto his Facebook account. And as you may recall, Ashraf, on Facebook it always asks, so what's on your mind?
Yes.
And Zama then spoke about what was on his mind, and he wanted to celebrate the deaths of these 42 white South Africans, not realizing that they were children who had died in a bus accident when their bus crashed into the Westdene Dam. But I think the principle of the story is firstly the way in which social media has been used to perpetuate the sort of racism and hate speech. I think this is one element. But the other is around the question of race and how often our views of race and racism are shaped by our own personal experiences. And I think this is certainly something as South Africans, we come with a long list of baggage and history and something we need to be acutely aware of as we engage with others. Now, we've had cases like in this one, which we successfully resolved. Zama eventually apologized publicly and went to lay a wreath of flowers on the graves of the children who died in the bus accident. But we've also had cases, to be absolutely frank with you, Ashraf, where we've attempted to mediate between individuals and unfortunately has not resulted in the same situation. So as the South African Human Rights Commission, we want to try and promote and transform South African society from a racist apartheid past to a society of egalitarianism and equality. But the challenges we face 20 years into democracy shows that there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done. And I think shows such as yours assists us in thinking through some of these difficult issues.
Well, I'm very happy that you identify as one of those people that can assist. Now, just to take that story a little bit further, what was fascinating when I was reading this is the exchange between Zama and the young attorney representing the white families in this. Just unpack some of that, please.
Sure. So I sat across the table with Zama on the one hand and the applicants in this matter, a young white attorney, very similar age to Zama in fact. And as I was observing these two individuals interacting with each other, I recognized that here was someone who was born into poverty, into a very difficult situation as a black South African, and someone who was born into a fairly wealthy middle-class upbringing as a white South African, someone who had opportunity and access to knowledge, resources and skills. And these were the two individuals who were sitting across the table as we were negotiating a settlement agreement on this matter. And what was quite interesting was how the white lawyer in this case responded to Zama, indicating that this is something that he recognized and understood as a major problem in South Africa facing the country at the moment, and was willing to make certain amends in that regard. And I think often bringing two people together, two people who are often on different sides of the railway lines, as it were, who live in different segments of society, is one of the important roles that we play at the Commission, because it's only when you are interacting with someone who may be very different from you, who may have a very different lifestyle and upbringing from you, that you are able to understand their perspective. And I've had similar experiences in my personal life around this, which really allows you to shift your views and your perspectives. And I would encourage people, and South Africans in particular, and all of the listeners and viewers of the show, to open yourselves to different experiences, to be able to engage with the other, and often individuals that you may not see as a part of your own community or your own society. This is very important for transformation and building an equal society in South Africa.
So just a reminder to our viewers that our lines are open, and as always our number is 011-086-7701-2 or 3. I'll repeat that, 011-086-7701-2 or 3, and it would appear on your screen as well. So you're very welcome to call us. Karim, our topic for this afternoon was social media and human rights. Now, at first blush, it doesn't look like it's a topic that can actually fit coherently together. You think of social media as all of the Facebook and Twitter accounts and everything else that people use. And on the other hand, human rights. What has that really got to do, and how does the two meet?
To share with you a little bit of an anecdotal story, my father, who's 65, happens to be on Facebook.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is he often makes various comments and statements on Facebook based on his own personal experiences. And I've seen and just watched him personally as a 65-year-old shift his views and perspective over this period based on his interactions with social media. And so I think it's an important tool that allows us to firstly communicate with each other, stay in touch with each other, and also as a mechanism for shifting views and perceptions. At the same time, it can also be a fairly negative tool. It can be a tool that's used to perpetuate hate speech and inequality. And you may have come across situations where Facebook friends or people you follow on Twitter may be sending out messages that do not necessarily conform with the values of the Constitution. And so there's a double-edged sword when it comes to questions of social media. One of the other negatives, Ashraf, you'll probably notice at dinner tables sometimes, everyone is sitting tweeting each other or texting each other using their phones as opposed to engaging with each other on a face-to-face basis. And so there are some challenges with respect to social media, but I do believe it can be an absolutely important tool for promoting and protecting human rights. And this tool was particularly effective during the uprisings in the Middle East and particularly in Egypt, where Twitter and Facebook was used as a way of consolidating a campaign to ensure the overthrow of the former regime in Egypt. So it can be quite a powerful tool. Of course, there have been attempts to shut down social media sites such as Twitter and Facebook in the past by authorities such as China as well. And the United States, of course, have attempted to regulate the use of social media because they find it disadvantageous to their regime as well. And so consequently, people such as Edward Snowden and others who have used media and social media as a way of ensuring that the world knows about what's happening in various secretive organizations in the United States, amongst others, it really can be an important tool and a very powerful way of equalizing access to information, knowledge and education.
Okay, we have a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Walaikum salam.
My question pertains to conveyancing. Is that a relevant topic I can raise with you guys?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I bought a property and I moved into the property on the 1st of April.
Yes.
On the 4th of April, I noticed some irregularities with electrical work. I notified the estate agent, the attorneys, and the previous owner before the property was actually registered on my name. Even though there were irregularities, the property was still lodged and transferred onto my name. And I've been trying for, this part of 8 weeks to actually get the previous owner or the electrician to actually fix the irregularities at my house. And the cost of that extra charge would be 8,500 rand, which the electrician has quoted on. However, the previous owner refuses to pay, and she's actually forcing the electrician to pay it out of his pocket, and that's why it's taking so long to actually get the work done. What is my recourse?
You have recourse for all amounts below 15,000 rands to the small claims court in your area. It's the most effective, cheapest way of getting results. You do have a right to force them or get to have it repaired and then claim the money back from them, or as you put it, 8,000 rand is what you would be out of pocket for. So you can actually bring the application in the small claims court. Your relief would be to go to the small claims court clerk in your area, ask them to assist you with issuing out a letter of demand. After 14 days, they would assist you with issuing out a summons. Now, it's the very, very cheapest way, quickest way of gaining access.
Okay, so as you mentioned now, if I go to the small claims court to put that through, would I need to do that before or after I actually make the changes?
No, you have a choice now. You know that it's going to cost 8,500 rands to repair.
Yes.
So you could ask that they pay you the 8,500. Alternatively, you pay that money and you claim it back. However, you also have recourse to the attorney, that the seller's attorney, because they would have had to give you a electrical compliance certificate. In terms of the law, that electrical compliance certificate would have to be lodged together with the transfer document. So you have recourse, and as I say, in the event that you don't want a long drawn out battle with the seller or the electrician, go to the small claims clerk and have that letter sent out.
But do you think my claim is valid?
Pardon?
There's a claim that it's the previous owner's accountability to actually...
Yes, because
cover the
that's the whole idea, is that is for them to certify that the property and the electrical points on there are all compliant in terms of the Act. They can't get away out of it. They can't get away from it.
Okay, shukran.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay,
So-
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. So, okay, here we're talking about social media and the impact that it has and its assistance. And I remember on one of my previous shows, we were very surprised to find, when we were covering the Burmese, the condition of the Rohingyas, that a gentleman sitting in Canada was receiving social media tweets from the Burmese victims, and he was in turn publicizing this, and that's how the world actually got to know about it. But just last week there was another incident in Sri Lanka. I think there was an attack again against the Muslims. I think it was they accused the Buddhists for those attacks. So as you point out, a very, very powerful media. Now, what is the link then between unsocial media, as you've written in that article, unsocial media and human rights?
In terms of unsocial media, I think that there's a view expressed by certain writers arguing that social media has a very limited impact, actually, when you look at the impact it has on promoting and protecting human rights. Arguments have been made that if we look at the civil rights movement in the United States or the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, we didn't have cell phones or social media available at that time. And yet, various activists were able to mobilize people on the ground to take on these authoritarian regimes. And so questions are being asked about the actual impact of social media in promoting and protecting human rights today. Recently, a good friend of mine living in Swaziland, who's a journalist, was arrested and locked up by the King of Swaziland for publishing an article which was critical of the King. And I started a Facebook campaign to try and bring attention to my friend's situation. What I found interesting was that there were hundreds of people who liked the Facebook page or who made comments on the Facebook page. But when I attempted to arrange a protest march outside of the Swazi embassy in Pretoria, very few people who had liked the Facebook page actually turned up for the protest march. And so the dissonance between people's responses to social media and the actual engagement on the ground, I think, is something which I also draw attention to in the article. And this is why there are question marks about the actual effectiveness. In certain cases, as you pointed out, the Burmese example, as well as in cases such as Egypt, the social media impact appears to be fairly effective. But in other instances that I've found personally, there are limitations to what it can do. So I propose that a combination of on-the-ground activism, the kind that we understand and are familiar with, together with social media, would make a very powerful coalition in terms of promoting and protecting rights.
Now, I mean, it appears that it's the widest possible advantage that one could have to popularize a particular cause. Is it not true that it can also be either limited or exploited?
Certainly, and I agree with you completely. In terms of the limitations, one of the critical issues we are often confronted with at the Human Rights Commission is the freedom of expression provision in the Constitution versus what amounts to hate speech.
Right.
And there's a fine line between the two. And so, of course, the Constitution provides for limitations in terms of freedom of expression. We have seen various challenges on the question of freedom of expression in South Africa in the past. Viewers may be familiar with the painting that was drawn of our own president,
Yes.
Zuma, and the kind of attention that particular painting drew. There have also been other instances where free speech has been curtailed or limited. In the United States, for instance, where the Ku Klux Klan decided to march in certain areas, various restrictions were placed on them, but the US has a very specific view around freedom of expression, of course.
Okay, I'll ask you to just pause there. We have a caller on the line.
Sure.
Caller, go ahead, please. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Please go ahead. What is your question?
Yes, we are foreigners who live in Durban. I was asking about the legal wise because we are having the garage mechanics working on the street, so the municipality tries to stop us and walk in the street, so we don't know how to do.
If I understand your question, you're saying that you're a foreigner and you're operating a business in the street and you're being stopped by the municipality.
Yes, sir.
Okay, will you be able to deal with that?
Sure, I can try and assist. We have in the past dealt with matters where small business owners, and particularly foreign nationals, have been prevented from operating their businesses in certain municipalities. We had similar cases in Johannesburg and in Tshwane municipality. What we would need is, I would encourage the viewer to contact one of our provincial officers, and because more details would be required in terms of what the specific situation is. And our details are available on our website, which is sahrc.org.za. And if you can contact our local provincial office, I think this would be helpful to try and lodge a formal complaint with the Human Rights Commission. To let you know that there are certain restrictions about trading, and clearly those municipal bylaws would have to be abided by. But on the other hand, if you've been operating a legal business for a considerable period, there are certain considerations that need to be afforded to you as well. So depending on the specifics of your case, we would be happy to look into that situation for you.
Thank you for your question. We need to go for a short break. Please stay tuned. We'll be joining you just after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the last segment of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. The lines are open, so you're welcome to call. Okay, we were talking about something earlier on, and I think you had written an article in the New Age in March 2013, where it was just after the Marikana tragedy. It says, it went around, are the police suffering from compassion or a deficit in leadership? Please take us through the dynamics of that particular article in the context of Marikana, which I think the Human Rights Commission, you're playing a very important role in.
Absolutely. In terms of the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, the South African Human Rights Commission is one of the applicants in that matter, and we've been intimately involved in phase 1 and in future in phase 2 of the Marikana Commission. Phase 1, of course, looks at police culpability. And one of the issues we've been engaging with is providing the Commission of Inquiry with insights into police behavior on the day of the shootings and leading up to the day of the shooting. We have had a testimony by Gary White, who is an independent expert that we flew into South Africa to provide that kind of testimony. And what we've seen so far is that the police failed to have a proper plan in place when they engaged in the Marikana situation, resulting in the number of deaths that we've come to see and understand But of course, the broader question needs to be asked around police culpability. We've seen various other incidents that the Commission has dealt with.
Kemi, just to stop
Yes.
you there, the Marikana tragedy came on the back of 2 minor skirmishes before then, or major, because there was a murder of a security guard and a policeman, and I think a minor.
Correct.
So against that background, the police were now, on high alert, if
Yes.
I could put it that way.
Yes.
So what was the finding of Gary White regarding the, let's say, the events leading up to the tragedy itself? And, on both sides, I'm sure there must have been a very, very high anxiety.
Indeed, and we often make assumptions about police behavior and police brutality, as we call it, but not fully understanding the position that police officers often find themselves in. And I think the point you raise, Ashraf, is therefore very critical. To try and place yourselves in the shoes of those police officers who were involved in this matter is near impossible for anyone such as myself, or even Gary White for that matter, and I think I acknowledged that quite openly. But what he had indicated was that in any public order policing situation, there has to be a plan in place which indicates exactly how the police were going to engage with a volatile situation.
Right.
And this appears to have been missing, according to Gary White, from that particular situation, which ultimately led to the kind of violence that we saw erupting and unfolding in Marikana. And he argues that it could be avoided if that plan and the proper training and skills were in place.
And what do we make about Mr. X's evidence that the miners were given some kind of traditional medicine that would have proved, very effective against the police? They wouldn't have been able to shoot or wouldn't have got shot. What are we to make of that kind of evidence? Is it something that the miners actually believed in? Did that come out clearly in the evidence?
It's a very interesting point, and I think many South Africans, particularly traditional minded South Africans, believe in the use of traditional medicine and often are more inclined to go to a traditional doctor than to a medical doctor for whatever ailments or illnesses that they suffer. And so one must try and understand the history and background around the way in which the miners thought and operated in this particular situation. They had, according to the evidence that I've heard, had various successful, quote-unquote, encounters with the police using this muti or traditional medicine, which they claim assisted in protecting them. And so there was the sense that this traditional medicine would protect them again when they interacted with the police. Of course, we subsequently found that this was not the case, and many miners subsequently died. But I do think that it speaks to a number of issues around the level of knowledge and awareness that South Africans have about traditional medicine and the impact or the lack thereof that could potentially have in a certain situation. But also, of course, the way in which the police responded to the situation, I think, is certainly an issue that we need to consider as well.
Now, with regard to our topic today, which is social media and human rights, let's say if I and most people own cell phones with cameras on that, and I happen to record a incident of human rights abuse by the police or anyone else.
Yes.
Now, those images recorded on my phone, do they belong to me? And is there any restriction in terms of the Electronic Communications Act on me and what I can film and what I can't film and what I can pass on? Are there any restrictions?
So an interesting situation unfolded not too long ago in the Mido Machia matter. As viewers may recall, Mido Machia was a Mozambican national who was tied behind a police van and dragged to his death. And recently, the police officers involved in this matter were found guilty of these acts of violence against...
In the disciplinary committee?
Absolutely, in the disciplinary committee, yes. And so this incident, of course, was taped on a camera on a cell phone. And in certain instances, I know the police had attempted to try and confiscate these images from members of the public, but they have absolutely no right to do so. There are certain restrictions, of course, placed on what you are able to film. Very recently, members of a political party were forcibly removed from the Gauteng provincial legislature, and this was again captured by a journalist who was taking images. There were specific prohibitions on the journalist being able to do so, but he nevertheless published these images. And if you can prove that the images need to be published in the public interest, I think this holds a very strong sway given the restrictions on freedom of information and expression. So in those particular instances, I don't think that the police have any right whatsoever to remove those images or cell phones from the possession of the crowd who forms around them.
But there are restrictions, for example, in national key points,
Yes.
Legislatures, certain Home Affairs, I think, has also had a incident where they said you can't actually film inside the department. So certain public buildings,
Indeed.
certain government departments for security, etc., are removed.
Exactly, yes.
Now, let's say if I have a camera for my own security in my business or somewhere else, and I happen to record an incident, let's say a robbery or a murder. Again, does that entitle me to go onto social media because it's images that I've captured on my equipment? Does that entitle me to go into social media and publicize this?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have a good enough answer for you, to be absolutely frank, Ashraf. I think that clearly the first response in a situation like that, where you capture a robbery taking place, would be to hand that information over to the police so that they could investigate the matter. But there have clearly been incidents where news media have gotten hold of similar footage and publicized this, and various individuals have also, of course, decided to take matters into their own hands and to publicize this on social media sites such as YouTube and so on. I think we'd be hard-pressed to restrict an individual from doing so, but clearly it may not necessarily be in the best interest of that person, given safety and security concerns, to do so. I think the best option would be to engage directly with the police service on this matter.
But it is a media that could be misused as well. What comes to my mind is something doing the rounds in the UK, is where couples basically record their relationships, and then when there is a breakdown, then they go into the public domain with that.
Yes.
And I think that the judges have ruled in the UK that that's certainly not allowed. But can you imagine the kind of fallout and the damage that already occurs?
Exactly.
Another area is bullying. I think in the US, there were certain incidents of bullying was captured on social media, or you could be disparaged in the social media, and it could have a very, very negative impact on your life.
Absolutely. And you're right when you mentioned the cases in the UK. I think the jurisprudence has evolved quite significantly around social media in the UK and in the US, where, of course, these technologies have been available for a much longer period. And we are seeing a growing number of court cases taking various approaches to this issue. I think the general sense is to allow for freedom of expression, but clearly there have to be limitations in place. And I think the incidents, as you referred to, Ashraf, where people's personal and private lives are made very public, clearly would infringe that individual's right to dignity and privacy, and that would clearly pose a restriction on the use of social media in those instances.
Now, a grey area is definitely the use of drones for capturing images, and there's no legislation yet that says a drone can't be flown locally. So, like for example, in the US, Amazon is now being challenged because they're delivering books by drones. But if you looked at outside the Pretoria High Court during the Oscars Pistorius trial, there were drones.
Yes.
They were capturing images without your knowledge.
Yes.
And so would you have a right, is it your human right not to have your image captured without your consent?
I would certainly think so. If there's no consent given for an image to be publicly displayed, I think that would definitely be an infringement of your privacy and your dignity. And recently I came across a ruling by the aviation authorities banning the use of drones in South Africa. But this, of course, is again subject to a lot of debate and discussion, given the potential commercial value of the use of drones in this country and elsewhere. So it's again one of those grey areas, as you correctly put it, which require a lot more discussion and debate. And I think as long as there's proper regulation and guidelines in place, there shouldn't necessarily be restrictions on these technologies when these technologies have an absolute benefit for society as a collective.
Now, while they have a benefit for society as a collective, there's also misuse that we were speaking about. For example, it's now emerged that certainly I think it was Vodacom or some other company that was accused of passing on information. Now, in terms of the law, if there's an investigation then the investigating officer is entitled to go and obtain cell phone records and through a court warrant, basically. But let's go to the US, where there has been an outcry about various social media networks being used to monitor people. But before you come to that answer, I understand we have another caller in line. Go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I'm calling from Johannesburg.
Yes.
It's regarding a human rights issue that I'm trying to grapple with. Human rights seems to always, when a victim if there's a murder or robbery, victims are normally never looked at from a human rights point of view. In all instances, the human rights people always go and look at the prisoners and the accused and people that are convicted and make sure that they are looked after so well in prison that the victims are always more than double penalized. They suffer loss of life, loss of dear ones. They suffer trauma, and then they also go through another part where they have to fund the prisoners and people that are the perpetrators of violence and violent crimes. So we're going to fund them with our taxes and still keep them in beautiful prisons to make sure that they have a beautiful human rights life.
What is your question?
My question is to human rights people: are they not looking at the victims more than the perpetrators of violence?
Okay.
Why are they never concerned of victims the same way that they shouldn't at all be concerned about perpetrators? Perpetrators should actually, we should actually ask for death sentence for people that are in rape and death cases.
Thanks for your question.
Sure.
Okay?
This is often a misconception amongst a large number of people, and I think that the person who called in is representative of a large number of South Africans who may feel very similarly to the way in which he does, that we tend to protect the perpetrators of crime as opposed to the victims. Now, my perspective is that the way in which you treat the marginalized and poorest in your society, the people who are in prisons and the people who are on the margins of our society is often the reflection of the society itself. I've visited a number of prisons personally, and I can honestly tell you that those prisons are not luxurious. They are the worst places on earth that I've ever seen, including refugee camps that I've visited. Prisons are by far one of the worst places in the world. And I doubt very much that our view of prisons and the prison system is necessarily as luxurious as the caller suggested. But at the same time, I recognize the challenge that he's raising. When a woman is raped, one often finds that there's a huge process that she has to go through, court and secondary victimization that takes place, and the length of time the justice system takes to afford justice to this individual, to this victim who survived a rape. Whereas the perpetrator, of course, the alleged perpetrator at that stage, is kept in a cell, is fed and clothed and so on. And I think this is often the distinction that's drawn. One must recognize that both individuals, until he or she is found guilty of the crime, has a right to a fair trial, has a right to be housed in proper conditions in prison. And so consequently, we must ensure that we weigh up both the rights of the victim as well as the accused in this particular instance. And there are numerous examples where this has not happened, but I think in the overwhelming majority of cases, we do find as human rights activists that we must ensure that the rights of both parties are absolutely protected. And this, I think, is a reflection of the way in which our broader society operates and considers human rights.
But what you're really saying is everyone has human rights, irrespective
Indeed.
of whether you're a perpetrator of a crime or a victim of crime. I think what the caller is saying, he feels there's a disjoint. He feels that the perpetrators of crime should be deprived of their human rights. And I don't think that is ever going to happen.
Sure. Well, I hope not. I mean, there have been certain cases where that has happened, and we see this in the United States in particular. And when we look at the death penalty, which is a good example, we often assume that the death penalty is a deterrent to crime. But when you compare stats in California, which doesn't have a death penalty, and Texas, which does have the death penalty, you do find that there are more murders in Texas than there are in California. So is the death penalty really a mechanism to reduce crime? In our studies, we found that this is not the case. We also find that in the United States, more black African Americans are subject to the death penalty, even though black African Americans form the minority in that country. In South Africa, of course, it was anti-apartheid activists who were often the subject of the death penalty, as opposed to criminals that we normally understand as murders and rapists. So the use of the death penalty is also highly problematic, and this is why, as a human rights advocate, I'm strongly opposed to the use of the death penalty in South Africa.
Kayum, we're out of time. Thank you very much. We only have a few minutes or few seconds to say thank you for having attended here this afternoon. I certainly have benefited tremendously, and I'm sure our viewers have too. And yeah, we wish you all the best with that. And just a reminder to the viewers there, what would you just say to them regarding the human rights and coming to the Human Rights Commission?
Recently, there was a Foundation for Human Rights study suggesting that only 10% of South Africans have actually read the Bill of Rights or had the Bill of Rights read to them. I would encourage every single viewer to actually take some time to just read through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and to begin to understand and grapple with those rights, as well as the associated responsibilities that we all have as individuals.
Thank you very much for having joined us this afternoon, and to the viewers as well. Thank you for your calls. Keep well until we meet next week at the same time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.